God made everything. God still owns everything. He lent us life. He lent us these things around us, all these things, and it's up to us to use them for His purposes. Now, it's really fun to run into you. That lady,
Sorry?
she just puts people where she wants them.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I'm super happy we fortuitously ran into each other. So, which led us to chatting. So that's awesome. This out of the start, I'd love to know a bit about your faith journey. If you're a cradle Catholic, a convert, a revert, what does that look like for you?
Okay, so I'm a cradle Catholic, and my mom is one of the best Catholic people I've ever known. We always went to, and my dad was very good too. My dad faithfully, made sure we all went to church every week. And I remember one of my earliest memories is dad teaching us to pray the rosary. The family ran into some trouble when I was in high school. My dad and my brother killed themselves, and then that was shortly before I joined the police department in Dallas. And it turned out that that was a very violent thing. And so I continued going to church, but not as often, because I tell people, that, know, thumping something that honestly possibly needed a thumping on Saturday night, felt inconsistent with going to mass on Sunday morning. And so I kept going, but not as fervently, not as often. But I always felt that, there was something there. So then
Mm-hmm.
got married to a Catholic woman, although her family had kind of turned their back on the church. And I guess I was a bit naive because I always thought that, we would just kind of naturally go back in the direction of having kids, being Catholic, and going to Mass. I mean, that's what you do. That's what life is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I always instinctively understood, even from a very age, that, the first task in life is to look for the truth and to live according to it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you even think for a moment, it's obvious that um, a creator exists because creation exists. I always think about The Sound of Music. My mom took us to that when I was a kid, and there's a line in there that says, "Nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could." Well, I mean, that seems kind of just obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
And then,
yeah.
I always liked Pascal, or yeah, what was it? Is it Pascal? Descartes, Pascal Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That's the only thing you can absolutely know for sure. Everything else has some degree of faith in it, like whether you and this screen actually exist. I have to
Mhm.
take on some degree of faith. The only thing I know is I'm thinking, so I must exist. So all of these things just make sense to me. Was just kind of a Sunday Catholic, not really thinking about things too much until I got actually into a horrid divorce. It was actually the worst time of my life. Just a lot of, and part of it was over the church actually, but just a lot of unnecessarily viciousness involved, and the kids were just horribly abused emotionally, and it hurt me a lot. I was very upset about the findings of a doctor, a psychiatrist, and at this time I was living in New York and was out running one day, and I at the time I prayed fairly often, but mostly just for thanks. I didn't really, put my trust, myself in God's hands and ask for help. Um, but I was out running one day and kind of a breezy autumn day, and I just kind of stopped in the middle of the street, just overwhelmed with just despair over this awful ruling that I knew was going to be terrible for my kids. And I stopped in the middle of the street and I just said out loud, "Look, if there is anybody there, can you please let me know?" And I got which I will keep private. I got an immediate and unmistakable response. It was not an accident on a windy
Mhm.
autumn day. It was just amazing. And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, okay. First thing is I'm never asking that question again. Thank you." And now I need to go away and think about what that means. So I started praying a lot more.
Yeah.
Ended up moving from New York to Toronto
Mhm.
with a lovely lady, a lovely Canadian lady, and got to Toronto, and one of the first things I did was I went to the Archdiocesan website to find out what parish I was in. And actually, I live on York Street, so This side of York Street is St. Patrick's downtown. The other side is the cathedral. So I
Mhm.
went up to St. Patrick's, which is run by the Redemptorists, who have just been just this lovely group of people. But the first time I'm there, this is a Saturday evening, the first time I'm ever there, this Redemptorist brother sees me and comes walking over after me and says, "Hi, I'm brother Frank. Is there anything I can do for you? You look, I think you're new. I don't recognize you." And I said, "Well, I got a couple of kids that are going to come join me in a few months, and they need to get through confirmation if there's anything you can do with that." And he says, "Well, we're getting a new pastor in September. Father Mick's going to show up, and he'll help you out." So I thought, okay, great. But never heard anything more about it. So about 4 months later, I'm back there again, and there's this new priest racing around. And as soon as Mass is over, he makes a beeline for me. He says, "Hi, I'm Father Mick. I heard you need help with your children getting given." I'm like, wow, I've never seen service like this in the Catholic Church. This is pretty good.
Yeah.
So Father Mick kind of got me involved, and I was praying a lot more. And I was praying mostly for guidance, just like,
Mhm.
what should I be doing?
Yeah.
Between Father Mick and just things happening at the parish, I began to suspect that things were leading back to Mary, which didn't surprise me too much because I was born on the Feast of the Assumption, and for some, you know, irrational reason, I've always felt inordinately happy with that fact. I just like it. We had to go to mass every year on my birthday, and I liked it. And then I was born in. I thought it was. I was born to a woman named Mary, whose parents were Mary and Joseph, in Mount Carmel Hospital, which is on St. Mary Street, and I was baptized at Our Lady Gate of Heaven Church. And so, you're like, okay, well, there's a few hints. So I felt some special connection there. But then I started asking, like, give me some guidance. Who's behind this? Who should I be looking to for help? And shortly after I met Father Mick, I'm walking into the church one Sunday morning, and this 80-year-old lady standing there. She says, "Would you like to join the Legion of Mary?" And I thought, oh, sure, that's just exactly what I was thinking. But why not? Because I do feel like, having asked a question, I got an answer. If I'm going to ask more questions and I get answers, then, I got to follow them, right? So I
Absolutely.
joined the Legion of
Absolutely.
Mary and spent a few years trucking around this 80-year-old lady visiting all these parishioners from St. Pat's. And it was super fun. We prayed the
Mm.
rosary every week. And things kind of developed from there.
Yeah.
My mom mentioned at one point that, I run all the time. Recently you've seen me doing that.
Yes, that's how we reconnected. Just
Yeah.
so happened to see you on a jog.
So mom said that she pointed out, because when I was a kid, I started running and she started running, and she mentioned that, she prayed the rosary when she ran. I said, "Oh, there's a good idea.
Mm.
So I started doing that. And the weirdest thing, I started all these feathers. I was just running down Queens Key one day, and this white feather comes flying out of the sky in the middle of nowhere and lands right in my hand while I'm running. Now, you think about the chances of that. A feather just, I didn't have to break stride. I didn't do anything. I just put my hand out and this feather fell right into it. And it started happening about twice a week after that for a longest time. I actually talked to my spiritual advisor about it. Anyway, we just decided it was a great sign of affirmation that the rosary is a good thing. So I became a real fan of the rosary. Um, and then Father Mick at church says, uh, pulls me aside one day and says, "Hey, I want you and Barbara over there to start a social justice committee." I'm like, okay,
Nice.
sure, whatever that means. So,
Before we go into the social justice committee, there's a couple questions I've to ask. I just want to backtrack a little
okay, yeah,
bit.
sure.
Um, you mentioned in your your youth and your father and your brother committing suicide. Is it okay if I just ask a
Oh,
quick
sure,
question
yeah,
about that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, how because that's a really dramatic thing to experience. Like I had my sister pass away 10 years ago, actually a bit more now. And I know the devastation it definitely wrought on myself and the echoes through my family. But that's a different thing versus when a person takes their life.
Yeah.
And you were practicing your faith at the time. How did that impact your faith? Did it strengthen, weaken? Did it make you pull away? Like I'd imagine there must have been some sort of an impact with that.
No, I gotta tell you, I'm a little bit odd that way. And actually, it parts of my makeup, I think, have led to problems. Like, so first off, I come from kind of Midwest Michigan German Catholic stock.
Mm,
And if you look into these people, they're just very quiet. They're very completely bound up with duty.
Mm,
and doing what they're supposed to do. They don't ask questions, they just take what comes and deal with it.
mm,
And that was born very deeply in me. And so my dad died first, and
mm,
that, that was a blow because my dad and I had a really special relationship.
mm.
But I mean, at some level, I just, I understood that that had to do with him and things around him. And, it was not not intended as an abandonment of me or anybody else. Felt mostly bad for my mom, who had told us once that she wanted one girl and got four boys, and then a husband who was gone a lot and then was really gone. So mostly I felt bad for mom. Um, so I tried to help her as best I could. And then my brother died because he felt like he contributed to dad's death.
Gotcha.
And that was kind of it because I actually found my brother and it was not fun.
So sorry that you had to experience
But
that.
so I mean, I missed them a lot,
Mm,
but I never felt like I'd take it too personally because I don't think it was primarily about me. It's something that's given
yeah.
to me.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
understood that those people still existed. They're just in a place where I can't talk directly to them right
Mm,
now. And I'll
yes.
tell you that both of my kids have reported interactions with them. And I was a policeman a long time ago, and a friend of mine from the police department reached out to say that she had been talking to some psychic and my dad interrupted their conversation to give me a message. And okay, sure. So I've always been confident that they're still around. It's
Yeah.
just, so I got to say that just, I guess with a good old German Catholic Midwest background, you don't question things too much, right? It would help
It's
sometimes if we did
yeah.
more, I think, but
Yeah,
we don't.
but I could see that. I guess a combination of that and being Catholic, where if you have
Yeah.
that very stoic side, and then as Catholics we're taught, in this life there is suffering. We need to learn how to
Yeah.
suffer well. So I could definitely see how you were able to kind of continue forward and forge ahead, and then carrying that faith with you into policing. How long did you do that, and where
In Dallas, Texas, I was a
gotcha,
policeman for 4 years.
gotcha.
It was it was interesting because the policemen I worked with were, until I started working with St. Monica Institute, were really the best group of people I've worked with in my life.
Okay.
They got all kinds of criticism, but if you actually knew these people, the police department was very selective who it hired,
Hmm.
and they hired, I don't know how they did, but they hired good people. They were out there trying to help people. They were trying to make the world a better place. And when you get into shooting and your buddies come running towards you rather than running away, that builds a bond, right?
Absolutely.
So those guys were great. But it's funny too because I always felt I had an uncle, my dad's brother, who was killed at Okinawa in 1945, right at the tail end of the war. He went all the way through the war and was killed, like very at the very end of it. But I always felt somehow connected to him, and I've decided, and this is maybe part of the reason I didn't feel too bad about Dad and Ernie, is because I always felt like George was at least partly my responsible for being my guardian angel. Like I got shot in the neck once when I was a cop, but it actually didn't really hurt me. It felt like I got hit in the neck with a baseball bat,
Oh,
but it was from the
which also
side.
doesn't sound very pleasant, Matthew.
Well, no, it wasn't, but it kind of came from the side and it
Yeah.
literally bounced off my neck into my shoulder. And it was hard enough that by the time I looked at my shoulder, I had, a knot the size of an egg that was already black and blue. And I thought, oh boy, I must be in trouble. But I found a nearby motorcycle, looked in the rearview mirror, and it was just the same thing on my neck. So I always felt that my guardian had helped me with that.
Mm,
And I always felt like that went back to Uncle George.
hmm.
And so I already was prepared, for the idea that family members continue to look out for one another, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that that makes sense. I see that perspective, especially going through getting shot in the neck and be seemingly unfazed and forging ahead. That's a
Oh,
remarkable outlook.
I was pretty angry, I gotta say.
Was that incident part of why you stopped becoming a cop and moved onward onto the other side
Well, kind
of
of a
Law
small
and Order?
part. The small part, because I worked in a really bad part of Dallas, and I have to say it was very violent.
Mm,
I was in 3 shootings in 6 months. I knew
wow.
two officers that were killed. Um, and I mean, it was just, nonstop violence, and I didn't have a girlfriend. And so, I realized at one point that I had touched plenty of people in the last 6 months, but not once was it nicely, right?
Hmm.
And I like, this is just not me. And I had a hard time. Like I said, I got angry when I got shot. And I got angry when people shot at me. Um, but I had a hard time not taking it personally. I mean, I realized I was shooting in a blue uniform, and I happened to be the person occupying that. But I was
Hmm.
not able to separate myself from that kind of thing like you should be able to.
Yeah.
And I realized this is not good for me. So
Hmm.
I've learned a lot here, made some great friends that I'm still in touch with, but I think it's time to move on.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And then from there you went into law, right?
Well, first I went into engineering. I went back to University of Texas, finished a degree in aerospace engineering, and I worked for the Boeing company for about 6 years in Seattle.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then during yeah, and as an engineer, as you went into law, did you find you
Yeah,
were
so
able to
I liked
integrate your
Boeing.
faith into your work also, or
Um,
how was that for you?
well, that engineering is kind of one of the reasons I think I picked that is I've always felt that, like I said, you're supposed to be looking for the truth and living according to it. So at that point, I was newly married and I was focusing on family. And engineering is a good thing. We built commercial airliners to get people together and help them do what they need to do. I was not on the military side. Um, and we had a great parish in Seattle there, Holy Rosary Parish. So I liked it a lot. And had some good Catholic friends. And so that was very good too. And we started having conversations like I carpooled with a guy who was a convert from Judaism. And it was interesting because he made me a better Catholic because I thought, like, wow, you voluntarily chose to become Catholic? Really? All the weird stuff we do and think, but we had great conversations and that helped me a lot. So,
In what sense?
well, I realized that, okay, well, this stuff really does make sense and it's not just me.
Hmm.
We, there's actually a lot of sense to this and it convinces other people, right? So
Yeah.
that's very reassuring, right?
Yeah. That's it. I could see how that would be. I'm a bit of a revert. I did my RCIA a couple of years ago, but
Yeah,
what's funny is I actually didn't realize I was baptized Catholic until I had to like speak to my mom about it
that's
because
very good.
we weren't like super church going or anything like that. So
But you
that
got marked with that seal, didn't you?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I can see how, as a somebody who comes up with it, to see somebody who's a convert or revert, how that would, how each influences the other on that in that instance.
But I've always felt very strongly that, I mean, I wonder if I had been born neutral or something else, if I would have gravitated towards the church. But I've always felt very strongly that being born Catholic, I was going to stay Catholic. And the deeper I go into it, the more I learn about it, I really do think that the church has the best repository of truth known to history. Um, you know, Catholics very often misbehave. They're human beings. But there's been a whole lot of very smart people involved in the Catholic Church and very spiritual people. And the resultant body of teaching, I think, is just the greatest gift to the human race. It's just to humanity. It's a beautiful thing.
I fully agree, and as part of my faith journey,
Yeah.
when I was wandering the spiritual desert, as it were, I was attending like a non-denominational type church for a little bit, and it felt
Yeah.
like it was missing something. And until my now fiance invited me to meet a priest and start going to a Catholic church, that feel and experience that fullness that you speak of, and it's like, oh yes, okay, this is the
There is
place.
no
This
aspect
is
of life that church is not thought through.
100%, 100%, 100%.
And it's easy to make fun of things, but if you look at the reasons for it, it always makes sense too. It may not be convenient, but it makes sense.
Well, that's it. To be Catholic isn't always convenience to one's wants and the temporal things that they seek out. Because when you have to answer to something higher, it shifts your priorities, shifts your actions, which really seems to you really seem to exemplify that with as you're telling me as you're attending this new church and joining that Marian group and starting to get into you started mentioning the idea of was it getting into starting something around politics, social justice? What was it that you were
Well,
invited to create?
yeah, the first step was we were asked to start a social justice committee. And so
Mm.
I said, okay, sure. So I had to start learning about Catholic social justice,
Okay.
which I liked a lot. I began it, you know, the first step for that is very often there's all sorts of different um, formulations of 7 themes of social justice. And they're all
Hmm.
good. They all bear some resemblance to similar, but I've always found that traditionally they are very redundant and I think they're typically not complete. So I got to looking a little further. Well, but while I was investigating that, the same priest volunteered me to go to a course offered by the Office of Formation here in lay parish leadership. It was a 3-year thing, and we went, once a week for 3 years. And at the very end of it, two things happened. The first is this lovely guy named Porfirio Garcia explained to us the parable of the talents. And I'm ashamed to say that at the age of 40 something, I had always felt, that we're here for a purpose and we should be doing what we're supposed to be doing. But if you
Hmm.
look at the parable of the talents and somebody explains to you what it meant, it's squarely on that. Like when I was in high school, I thought I didn't like stupid people, but you realize at some point it's not fair to dislike stupid people. They didn't ask to be stupid. Just, the only question is how are they using what they were given, right? Are they trying? And if
Yes.
they are,
Yes.
you have to respect that. And so
Hmm.
I gravitated to that pretty easily. But then the parable of talents really crystallized it because, listening to that when I was a kid, I
Hmm.
always thought, well, wow, that poor guy that was afraid and just buried it. That seems kind of harsh. But you can kind of see God's point of view after a while. No, no, we're the way Porfirio said it was, look, God made everything. God still owns everything. He lent us life. He lent us these things around us, all these things, and it's up to us to use them for His purposes. In casting that light, that I went home literally that evening and I said to my wife, okay, I'm sorry, this is the game changer. I should have seen this a long time ago. I felt like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, but like, okay, that's actually the best way of saying what I felt my whole life. Here it is. And I said, Lisa, I'm sorry, but this is a game changer. I don't know where this goes, but that cements it. So the next thing that happened is they gave us, for practice, they asked us to prepare a PowerPoint presentation and presented to the group. And so my group was given the topic of the rights and responsibilities of Catholics in elections. And that really resonated with me because I think most people were feeling instinctively by that time that, the problem with the world is that people are trying to pull us apart and divide us for their own purposes rather than bring us together and do things that are really good for all of us.
Hmm.
And so that, pointed straight back to Catholic social teachings. And I found a compendium of the social doctrine of the church. And the compendium has a framework which is just marvelously comprehensive and not at all redundant, with there's 4 permanent principles, 4 permanent values, and of course they're formed by Catholic virtues too. So you got the principles of um, the sanctity of life, life and human dignity, the common good, solidarity, and subsidiarity, which is completely misunderstood, but it means that everybody is supposed to be responsible for themselves and using their own gifts as best they can. But then part of the responsibility of society is to help us do that. And
Hmm.
if you look at the world through that framework, it all makes sense. You have a
Hmm.
comprehensive framework that just makes sense. And so that led me to start Catholic Conscience. I thought, okay, this is good stuff. We need to do this. And I started with parish level all candidate meetings at the writing level.
Yeah,
We
and
came up with
just for
questions.
people who aren't super familiar with Catholic conscience, if you could get kind of give like a 10,000 foot
Well, the idea
overview
was
of what it's
just
about.
to well, the way I put it is to bring the gospels and social teaching into the center of civic discourse without taking sides. It seems to me like the comprehensive and really good for humans framework is what the world needs. And so first the idea was, okay, why don't we have these all candidate meetings where instead of, harassing people and yelling at them and asking divisive questions, we just say, look, we Catholics care about life because, we're all born to look for truth, and the truth is God, and God made us to do God's work, and so obviously if you terminate somebody's life, that interferes with their duty to do their opportunity and their duty to do what God wants them to do, right? So that's why we're against it. It's not because we, want to wag our fingers at people, but you're cutting people off from the opportunity to serve. And it was really funny because we just asked open-ended questions. I sent the questions in advance. I told everybody, look, we're not here to hassle these people. We're here to listen to them respectfully and talk to them and listen to them. And everybody loved it, but I think maybe the people that loved it most were the candidates,
Oh,
over and over and
interesting.
over again. They would pull me
Interesting.
aside and say, this was great. We
Hmm.
never get a chance just to talk to one another and consider these things from this kind of point of view where we're all trying to, figure out, find common ground and work together. So it was really popular and it worked really well.
Yeah.
Um,
And what have been some of the big successes you'd say with Catholic Conscience?
well, it moved on because that was going pretty good. And that was doing all candidate meetings at the riding level is kind of labor intensive. And we had a lot of volunteers. And so we were slowly growing.
Hmm.
But then two things happened in the 2019 elections, or actually the 2015 elections, the first ones. One of the parties at some point about midway through the election cycle said, okay, we want you to stop interacting with community organizations. So suddenly all these people I had signed up suddenly started to remember they had other appointments and canceling their participation. And then of course all the other parties say, well, if they do it, we got to do it too. So pretty soon, the idea of that was just I had a couple of meetings where the only person that showed up was the green person, which was great because they got good platforms. But and I
Yeah,
my standpoint was, look, I invite you. If you show up, we'll continue. And if you don't, there'll be an empty seat with your name tag on it, right?
absolutely.
But then I ran into this lovely guy, Brennan Stephen, who said, first off, we really should be focusing at party levels because this is in the days when the parties were really aggressive about telling, and I think they are now, but saying, individual members, you're not allowed to vote your conscience. You just have to vote the party line.
Toe the line, toe the line. That's what we definitely see here.
And so that actually made things a lot easier for me because I realized what I could do was just do a lot of this online because what I've evolved to doing was just taking all of the platforms of all the parties registered for the race and cutting them up and putting them side by side with Catholic social teachings. And it's neat because the social teachings are comprehensive enough that there's no single line in any of these things that won't fit somewhere in there. Now, there's a lot of self-serving stuff that I ignore, but I look for the substance, and there is a place for it. And so I developed Catholic Conscience's own kind of 7 themes of, life and human dignity, the common good, the environment, the economy, solidarity, responsibility, and subsidiarity, and then good governance. And so everything fits somewhere
Hmm.
and published it online. And it's actually become very popular.
Yeah, I'll tell you it. The work Catholic Conscience has done has helped me the last couple of elections.
Oh, that's great.
I've it's really helped discern instead of looking at a candidate specifically because
Yeah.
there's you got to be wary of the cult of personality or
Yep.
just thinking of towing the line of something that maybe this will help my job or something like that. Catholic Conscience that personally helped me really take the time to discern and to see, okay, who aligns best with the teachings of the church, and how does that fit with me. And I got to say, and this, I'm not just saying this uh, just because we're conversing. It's helped me a lot, and I got to say, the way you've diced it up has been extremely helpful for somebody like me who's not necessarily like as well versed in some of these nuances. And Catholic Conscience does a great job of bringing up the issues and making it digestible.
Well, I'm really grateful for that because it's nice. I do feel like we're getting we've not reached all of the voters, Catholic voters, even in Canada yet. But every election time we grow by basically an order of magnitude. It just grows every time. We've done most of the provinces now, and I did the U.S. midterm elections last time, and very few objections, only from people that want clear answers or just knee-jerk react to the Catholic Church having anything to say about politics at all, and I can't help that.
Yeah.
Um, but the approach is always, look, we're not telling you who to vote for. We will never do that. If the Pope is running against Satan, I won't tell you who to vote for. I hope it's obvious, but the point is you're supposed to pray about this. You're supposed to inform yourself. You're supposed to pray some more and then vote the way you think God wants you to without worrying about anybody else.
Hmm.
Bearing in mind that, if you think of the loaves of the fishes, God can make whatever he wants out of one vote. Um, just approach it from that standpoint, and that will just improve the conversation. And then a lady named Kipler Yawarski from Saskatoon suggested that I come up with some points to ponder, like to ask questions about things that are or aren't being addressed. And that's been very powerful. And that turned into a newsletter, which is becoming powerful. But then the neatest thing, maybe if you take just a minute, is I started doing some background stuff more on the, just like a centralized explanation of the principles, values, and virtues of social thought, and publishing that just so anybody that wants to can go look at that without having to dig through all the candidate stuff. um, and then I ran across the concept of social sin at one point, and I found a little booklet that um, an Anglican priest had written in I think Westminster in like the 1920s or 1930s. He'd come up with a set of 7 social sins, that had related to issues that were prevalent in those days. And Mohandas Gandhi, somebody saw it and sent them to him, and he used it in the Indian independence movement. And so that's an interesting idea. So I did a little updating of that for modern, Western democracy, and put it on the website without a lot of fanfare and put it in a newsletter. But then that somehow got into this global network of, I think, Catholic school teachers and university professors, because it is consulted. It's amazing. It really is amazing. I mean, with Google Analytics, I can watch, and it's the single most popular page on the website. I can see groups of 20 to 30 people log on all the time, and they look at it for 5 minutes and they go away. Now, a lot of those are school kids that obviously, it's good that they're exposed, but they're not going to really sink in right yet, right? But you see some smaller group of that. Suddenly they're looking at the about page and going through who we are and what we do. And then they look at the newsletter, and the next thing you know, it's just all growing. So I did something on Just War when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's been very popular too. So anyway, it's gone global now. But now the folk challenge is to get back into the parishes. I got to start working on forming parish leaders and getting out the vote and stuff like that.
Hmm. Oh, that's incredible to just see that success and the fact that it continues to build upon it. And one of the things I really like is the fact that you're forcing accountability and responsibility onto people, where it's not prescribing who which party is the harbinger of all things
Yep.
Catholic. It's actually taking the time to peel back the layers to discern, which is such an important part of our faith, and then most importantly is to act. So I really love that formula that you've created, and I really look forward to seeing the evolution of Catholic conscience and all things that are going to come out of that for people.
Well,
And
thanks. I got to say, though, that I didn't create it. The Catechism talks about the duty to participate, because we have all these teachings. It's our duty to witness to them in society, and we have to do what we can appropriately to influence society. And Pope Francis, I like the way he said it. He says, a good Catholic meddles in politics.
that, yeah, yeah,
Yep.
we're yes, we're called to something higher and the hereafter, but in that time we have much work to do, much work to do.
Yep.
And what was that
And
along
we're
the
always
town?
going to have to. It's the nature of this life that we have to struggle against evil, right?
Yes,
So,
yes, and to much. What is it? To much is given, much is expected.
yep.
Yeah. And so, in addition to your work with Catholic Conscience, you're also the executive director of the St. Monica Institute for Education and Evangelization here in Archdiocese of Toronto. When did you get involved with that? And actually, can you share a little bit about what the St. Monica Institute is?
Yep. So I've been involved with that for about 2 years. Um, the origins, I think, go back a good 15 or 16 years. Cardinal Collins started thinking about it early in his archbishopric, I think. Um, and I think some of the original idea was to start a new Catholic teachers college. There's some concern that some of the things being taught in Catholic schools, while they're inclusive and joyful, they're not really consistent with Catholic teaching all the time.
Mm.
And I think that's solely because people don't understand their own faith, right? I mean, like I said earlier, if we understood why we do these things, it follows and you can do it happily and joyfully and you can explain to people. It's actually kind of simple, you know, killing people in utero prevents them from doing God's work, right? So,
Yeah.
so we got to think about that. And so, but then I think there was a realization pretty early on that starting a Catholic teachers college was going to be expensive and take a long time and was not a complete solution. So long before I got involved, people like Barry White, who is the archdiocesan liaison to Catholic education, they started collecting all the ideas about what St. Monica Institute could and should do. And I think really, for me, what it boils down to is St. Monica is sort of the poster child for Vatican II.
Mm.
It's kind of the central theme is providing formation for lay people, whatever their station in life is. If they're a lawyer, if they're a teacher, if they're a homekeeper, if they're well. One of the best examples I ever saw of stewardship was a quadriplegic lying in a hospital bed. Like how can I engage in the world joyfully in accordance with my Catholic teaching and witness to other people so as to make them understand the beauty and the joy of the Catholic teachings. And so it's a very broad mandate. It's kind of divided up into four. We're looking for better words. So if anybody has better word, I'd be so pleased. But four quadrants, which I don't know, I'm not happy with. But anyway, it's education still, parish life, family life, and then the public square. And so I got involved to the public square because there was talk about whether the Catholic conscience could help with the public square. And somewhere the conversation shifted, and I found myself starting the whole thing. So it's been really fun. And what I've done basically is I've kind of mapped out all the things I think any Catholic ought to have access to. And I'm trying to, it's not there yet, but I'm trying to build the website and our resources to where we can plug Catholics in wherever they want to be plugged without recreating the wheel in all cases, but creating new things where needed. So, catechesis is kind of turnkey. I just work with people that are already doing it. There's all kinds of traditional stuff that already exists, and I can just point people in that direction. But there are gaps and there are things to be done. Like we were talking earlier about, I mentioned to some journalists my concerns about not being able to find news sources, and so that turned into a kind of rejuvenating the Canadian Catholic news, but also starting a journalism course that has actually been just amazingly popular, and it's drawn people from, well, I know you joined us last night, Jermaine, but there was a priest there from Africa who was in charge of a Pan-African group. There's a
Mm.
lady from Bogota that's a communicator down there, people
Mhm.
from the US, people from Canada, all different kinds of communicators, but all talking joyfully and really appreciating just being exposed to the meaning of Catholic teaching for the process of journalism and communications. What does that do? How does that inform your work there?
Mhm.
And so that's a great example of the different kinds of things. Now we want to talk to teachers and lawyers about how to witness better in their daily lives and all that kind of thing. But it all comes from them. So,
Mhm.
it's really just me kind of gathering and coordinating.
Oh, it's fantastic. As somebody who was allowed to join the course a little bit late, it was quite remarkable just seeing where geographically where everybody is. Like you said, from Bogota, Colombia, there's another woman from Tallahassee, another guy who's on the west end of the city, somebody else
Yeah.
who's like you're from Africa. It's just I it as somebody who has sat in for a class, I was very blown away by the far reach. And it was just so amazing because looking at that screen and seeing all these faces from all over the place, it really spoke to the Catholic Church, that real sense of universal, where all these different people and all have that same mission in mind. So it's really amazing to see what is happening under your stewardship with the St. Monica Institute. What do you think is the future for it?
Well, it's just a matter of, I think, getting my arms around it building it responsibly. But I mean, the beauty is that I think that journalism course serves as a brilliant example of there is a thirst amongst Catholics who want these things. You know,
Hmm.
they understand that the church is the repository of great, 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 beautiful truths, but they maybe feel isolated. They're not sure they understand how to express it the best way. So
Hmm.
I think as long as we have the supply of people, most of what I do is respond to people who come to me saying, "Hey, you know, we ought to have something like this." And say, "Okay, great. How are we going to do that?" You know, and so the beauty is that there is a huge thirst for this, and I just got to figure out how to get us there responsibly. But there are signs like actually a lovely donor gave us $70,000 to work on journalism.
It's amazing.
It's just amazing. You know, I keep saying it. There's a thirst for this in Catholics because they realize the beauty and they want the world to understand it, and they see that the world can be considerably better for an infusion of Catholic social thought
Yeah.
and Catholic witness. You know.
Hmm. So with all this work that you've been able to do, in the realm of civil discourse, now helping with education of journalists, and who knows what'll come forward. How do you think your faith has been impacted? Because you've had quite the faith journey and the things that you've experienced, and even though, as you mentioned, being that descent of German Midwestern, very going forward at all times, you must feel the impact of that, the providence, and just being a witness to all of these amazing things in faith. How's yours been impacted?
Oh well, yeah, my faith just grows stronger. Partly it's Christ and his mother, I think, are very good in sending consolations my way. I mentioned the feathers, but another key moment was my wife and I. My wife is Acadian, you know, the old French people that got kicked out and came back. And I really admire them because they're never the people that are complaining the government needs to apologize to them or anything else. You know, they just kind of came back, rolled up their sleeves, and went back to work quietly. Went back to work in church. But anyway, so her family's been in Nova Scotia for the most part since, you know, 1604. So we have a house in Nova Scotia and we drive back and forth. And one of the first times we stopped along the way at the shrine of Saint Anne de Beaupré in Quebec. And we got there, we walked into the church just in time for Eucharistic adoration. And it was very interesting because, you know, we kind of just sat down and we're kind of resting and, you know, keep participating. But, you know, there's always a point where the priest lifts up the monstrance and goes side to side like this. And every time he did that, I felt this glow in my heart. It was like a searchlight going by. You know, it was unmistakable. It just, this overwhelming warmth just welled up inside me every time I went by like a searchlight. And he put it on and I thought, wow, that was odd. Yes, food for thought there. So we went, you know, about our business, went to dinner in a hotel, got in the car the next day, and we're driving out. And I mentioned to Lisa, I said, you know, I got to tell you, the oddest thing happened last night. I told her about it. She said she got very quiet and said, well, you know, that's odd because the exact same thing happened to me. And so I felt like, you know, that was affirmation that we as a couple are kind of on a decent road and pay attention to the Eucharist and keep going. And then I told you about my other consolation I was just given too. I live at the corner of York and Queens Quay, and I can show you pictures, you know, when we moved in. Most of the places north of us, between us and certainly the ACC and then the Royal York Hotel were just vacant lots.
Mhm.
And now it's all 50, 60-story condominium buildings. And directly across the street from me was the exit for York Bay and Yonge Streets from the Gardner Expressway. Was a circular thing. If you're going eastbound, you did a 270-degree turn to go north on York Street, or you could turn right on Lakeshore. Well, a few years ago, the city decided to knock that exit down, and so they did literally that,
Mhm.
and they left they left the supports for the exit there, so it looked a little bit like Stonehenge for a while.
Yes.
We're all wondering, you know, what are they going to do there? And they talked for a while about putting in a water treatment plant.
That was being discussed. I had no
That was
idea.
being discussed. And the neighborhood kind of went, there's a really good York Queens Key neighborhood association that kind of went non-linear, it said, excuse me, there's a lot of beautiful, there were a dozen beautiful mature trees there.
Mhm.
And, the neighborhood objected, said, no, don't, you gotta be kidding, it's gotta be something better than that. So they went away and came back and said, okay, we're gonna put a park there and we'll save the trees. But the first thing they did is they cut down 8 of the 12 trees, which just infuriated me. I always just, what? They said they were going to leave those trees there. Why are you cutting those trees down? They left 4 of them, and then they started construction, and they built this um, big pond, and it's a heart-shaped pond. They call it Love Park, and it's a little bit odd. I think I showed you a picture that
Mhm.
because they left this one unusual tree, and it's a really kind of neat tree because every year I was looking last night. I got a photograph of it from at least 2011, where it's like late May, and all the other trees have leaves, and this one's just looks dead. And every year I thought, oh, they finally killed that tree, but it blossoms in late May and just goes beautiful. And it left that tree right in the middle of the left ventricle of the heart, and it, so there's a heart-shaped pond, and in the left lobe of the heart, there's a little circle with a tree growing in it, and at first, I'm like thinking, why would you leave that tumor growing in the middle of that heart? That just seems odd as can be. And then they put the lobotomy in, and they put the little break lines in the concrete in the bottom of the pond, and they go out in concentric circles from the tree, and then there are radii that go out from the center of the tree. And I said, oh my goodness, that's the Immaculate Heart. If you replace that tree with a sword, you have a living example, a life-affirming example of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And I looked it up, and there's this lovely guy from Montreal, Claude Cormier, who was the architect, a very loving individual, I think. And I think he did it on purpose. I think he did it in a not overly overt way, just as a gentle reminder and as a sign. But I have to say, I have a very difficult time not taking aspects of that part very personally, because I think I told you that every year on my birthday, I consecrate myself to the Immaculate Heart. I read about Fatima years ago, and the last thing Mary said there basically was, if you people pray and do penance, then, a period of peace will be given to the world. If not, there's going to be struggles. But in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. And I have to say, it is just reassuring beyond words to have that park across the street.
That's
So my faith just grows and grows and grows, partly because God and his minions are good enough to give me huge consolations,
mm.
or at least what I interpret as huge consolations.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful, and that you've been able to uh, put your faith in action in so many ways, and really harnessing the talents that you have, and find different ways to grow your faith.
Yeah.
And in your faith growth, there's something I actually wanted to ask you about. Your parish church is run by Redemptorists, and you've become a lay associate of the
I'm a lay
Redemptorists.
associated with Olympus, yeah.
What does that mean, just for other people, if they're considering that, or if they've never heard about it? Maybe now this is something that's on their radar.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit dormant at the moment, mostly because of COVID, because we like to meet in person. But
Yeah.
the Redemptorists are just a lovely group of men. And there are Redemptoristine nuns, but not around here.
Mm.
So women too. But it's a very St. Patrick's has been a very active parish downtown, and the Redemptorists liked it. They wanted to feel closer to us, so they invited some of us to start praying with them once a month, and it's been beautiful. So it's mostly just prayer and discernment, because the Redemptorists, their charism is to just go out to the poor, but in each individual's own way. And so, I brought Catholic Conscience, now St. Monica, to it, is, kind of my ministries, and other people bring other things. But it's really just a touch point for nourishment and companionship. And
Mm.
it's a beautiful thing. I love it.
With all of your experience with Catholic Conscience, St. Monica Institute, being a lay associate, you've had a very strong formation. What sort of advice can you offer for those who are trying to find ways to live out their faith, whether it's through their work or just finding ways to do it outside of the Sunday Mass?
It's pretty simple. Christ was very, very, very clear about the importance of faith. Early in his ministry, he found that either he could not or would not work miracles in his hometown because people scoffed at him. So I think that faith is absolutely key. So I think that prayer, asking for guidance, works. But then the other half of that is you have to know, you have to be confident, you have to pray confidently, knowing that your prayer will be answered. Maybe, probably not in the way you expect,
Mhm.
but you have to look for the answers and you have to honestly assess them. And then you have to act on them. And I think that if anybody does that, if they honestly ask for guidance, look at the answers that are given to them and follow those answers logically, knowing that God is a loving parent and that we're all idiot children and we're going to make mistakes. Um, but God is not going to hold that against us. Rather, God is going to help us continue to get it where God wishes us to be. I think if you follow that, it will lead to beautiful places. Like this park across the street. I think the chances of any square block in any city in the world, let alone Toronto, turning into such a large Catholic symbol immediately across the street from somebody that has a severe devotion to that same symbol
Mhm.
is remote. But so if I reject and say, oh, that's just coincidence, it has nothing to do with that, God can work infinitely many purposes with any single act. That part is not just about me.
Mm.
There's no way. But it's about everybody. But there is a part about it that is uniquely for me in God's unique way. But I have to accept that, act upon it, and build from it, use that in whatever way as strengthening and consoling and just keep going, right?
Mm.
I think it's just a big thumbs up from God right?
Exactly it. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and your experiences. And I hope everybody takes the time to subscribe to Catholic Conscience and check out what is happening at the St. Monica
Thank
Institute,
you.
because there's a lot of great stuff going on that they can be a part of.
Thank you. And I will say to you and anybody else that happens to see or hear this, if you've got questions, if there's anything I can do to help, just write to me. And, my whole job is to help people develop their own vocations, right?
Should I leave email address or just a contact for the sites? What works best?
Yeah, you can use, there's the Matthew at catholicconscience.org.
Okay,
And then there's either M. Marquardt or admin at stmonicainstitute.ca. Either one of those will work.
perfect.
Or you can just go to the website, find me and send a contact thing. It'll get to me.
All right, I'll connect all
Yeah,
all of those so people with questions can
that's awesome.
reach out. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.